Have you ever wondered why a man who once seemed composed, self-assured and untouchable begins to tremble in silence when he's near a woman who awakens something he cannot name? His eyes hold a storm, yet his lips speak of calm. His gestures remain polite, but his energy betrays him. Beneath that surface lies an ancient battle between his ego and his shadow, a conflict Carl Jung understood as the secret theater of every man's desire. He hides it not because he wants to deceive, but because his mind, trained to conquer and control, cannot comprehend what his soul already knows, that he is drawn to her not by choice, but by archetypal gravity. To him, she is not merely a woman, she is the mirror of his anima, the unspoken feminine within him. Her presence threatens to dismantle the fortress he built from pride, fear, and unfinished wounds, and so he hides his desires, thinking that concealment will preserve his power. But the truth is far more intoxicating. What he hides becomes what owns him. His suppression feeds the addiction. He can't look directly at her light, for it burns away the false images he built of himself. Jung wrote of this that a man is never free from the woman who embodies his unconscious ideal. She becomes his living symbol, the projection of all he has disowned. Watch him in silence, the small ways he avoids eye contact when she looks too deeply, the stiffness in his laughter, the careful control of his words. Each moment of restraint is a confession. He fears his own reflection in her, because through her he sees everything he denied: tenderness, vulnerability, devotion. These are not weaknesses, though he's been told they are. They are the lost fragments of his humanity, and she evokes them effortlessly. If you have ever met a man like this, you'll feel it not through what he says, but through what he cannot say. His energy lingers, magnetic and restless. He disappears when things get too close, only to return with greater intensity. It is not love in its pure form, yet it carries the tremors of something fated. Jung would call it the dance of shadow and soul, an unconscious pull toward integration. But to the untrained heart, it feels like obsession. In the silence between messages, in the way he studies you as though deciphering a mystery, he hides 7 unspoken desires, not for your body, though that too, but for your light. He desires to be seen beyond his armor, to be forgiven for his fears, to surrender without humiliation, to touch the sacred part of you that reflects his own divinity, to lose control, if only for a moment, and be remade through your presence. But he cannot say it. His pride won't let him. His ego, trained to dominate, shudders at the thought of being undone. Yet addiction is born from denial. The more he suppresses, the deeper he sinks. He starts to orbit you in subtle ways, watching your social patterns, decoding your words, interpreting your silences. His rational mind seeks control, but his soul seeks surrender. Every withdrawal only intensifies the pull. You may think he's lost interest, but the truth is far darker. He's fighting himself. There is something profoundly psychological about this hidden craving. It's not lust, it's longing for self-reunion. You represent the unacknowledged goddess within him, the part that knows compassion, emotion, intuition. When he hides his desire, he's not hiding from you, he's hiding from himself. For to love you would mean to love the part of him that he abandoned long ago. And here lies the paradox. The stronger his facade, the deeper his dependency. He will retreat, withdraw, and rationalize his distance. Yet his thoughts will betray him. You'll feel it, even when he's silent. That tension between pride and yearning, distance and desire, is the echo of his inner battle. Every man addicted to a woman's energy is really addicted to his own shadow through her. Jung called it anima possession, when a man's unconscious feminine takes over, pulling him toward the very woman who mirrors his soul's missing half. It's not romance, it's initiation. You, unknowingly, become his psychological mirror, the test of his evolution. The wise woman doesn't chase this man. She observes. She knows that his silence speaks volumes, that his avoidance is not rejection, but reverence disguised as fear. To him, she's both danger and salvation, the one who could unravel him completely or awaken him beyond measure. And so he hides, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too deeply to face what she awakens. He thinks hiding his desire will keep him safe, but the more he suppresses it, the more it transforms from passion to fixation, from longing to worship. In his dreams, she appears not as herself, but as the archetype of every woman he's ever desired, yet never truly known. Jung called this the anima image, the unconscious blueprint of the feminine that every man carries within, and when a real woman embodies that image, his psyche ignites. He feels drawn, haunted, almost consumed, for she has become the bridge between his conscious self and the depths he avoids. But this desire is not simple. It's layered with fear, shame, and the echoes of boyhood wounds. Every man carries a mother complex, a buried memory of how love once felt like both nourishment and danger. The woman who triggers his deepest attraction also awakens his oldest fears of abandonment, rejection, or inadequacy. And so, when he hides his desires, he's not only concealing attraction, he's protecting his wounds from exposure. He cannot bear the thought that this woman might see the boy inside him, the one who was never enough, who had to earn affection by performing strength. So he hides. He uses logic, excuses, distractions. He might even convince himself that she's too much, too emotional, too deep. But beneath these words lies the confession of his soul. She makes him feel, and that terrifies him. Because to feel is to lose control, and for a man raised in the religion of control, surrender feels like death. Yet, paradoxically, it is precisely this death, this dismantling of the false self, that leads to rebirth. When he is around her, the armor cracks, his humor becomes forced, his confidence falters, and his energy oscillates between pursuit and withdrawal. You can sense his mind racing, calculating, resisting. But his body knows the truth. His eyes betray hunger. His silence throbs with unsaid words. She is the forbidden mirror that reflects what he cannot yet accept. That love is not domination, but dissolution. That desire is not about ownership, but awakening. For the feminine, in her intuitive, magnetic, mysterious calls to the lost feminine within him. He may mock spirituality, dismiss therapy, or avoid vulnerability, yet something in her presence disarms him. Jung would say she touches his unconscious through the language of symbol and soul. Her laughter, her stillness, her gaze, these are not random. They are the archetypal frequencies that stir his psyche into remembrance. He cannot understand why her absence feels heavier than her presence, or why he dreams of her voice when he's certain he's moved on. Addiction, after all, is not always to a person, but to the transformation they represent. This is why he hides his desires behind intellect, ambition, or even cynicism. He tells himself he doesn't believe in soul connections, but his behavior contradicts him. Every time he scrolls back to her messages, replays their conversations, or imagines what he should have said differently, he's engaging in ritual, a silent devotion to the feminine principle that challenges his false self. He may not understand that what he's chasing is not her approval, but his own integration. She is both temptation and teacher, a mirror that says, "Look deeper." For the woman, this dynamic can be confusing, even painful. She feels his pull, his retreat, his intensity cloaked in detachment. She wonders if she imagined it, but she hasn't. What she senses is the tremor of his psyche trying to awaken. The masculine that hides his desire is not playing games, he's protecting himself from initiation. True intimacy requires a man to meet his anima, his inner feminine, and that meeting is a kind of death. Most are not ready, so they run, they hide, they pretend indifference, but underneath it all, they burn. When you understand this, you stop chasing and start observing. You stop interpreting silence as rejection and begin seeing it as the sacred struggle of a man meeting his shadow. You no longer take his withdrawal personally because you recognize it as fear of transformation. You realize that your presence alone, your embodied self-worth, is enough to stir the deepest parts of him. So you let him hide, let him wrestle with his desire in solitude. The feminine does not chase, she invites. She remains radiant, grounded, self-possessed. For the woman who knows herself does not beg to be seen. She allows others to awaken when they are ready. In this patience lies her power, and in her power lies the secret of true attraction. He begins to feel the edges of his mask crumble, that carefully constructed identity of logic, status, and control that once kept him safe from the chaos of feeling. When he's near her, something primal stirs beneath the practiced calm, a pulse older than language. Jung might have called it the awakening of the shadow anima, the buried emotional life of a man resurfacing through the magnetic field of a woman who mirrors his truth. He tells himself it's physical, circumstantial, fleeting, but his body betrays him. The way he inhales deeper when she speaks, how his chest tightens when she looks away, how his pulse stumbles when she smiles. Attraction, at its highest form, is not about desire, it is about recognition. It's the unconscious saying, "There you are." In her, he sees not a lover to conquer, but a reflection of everything he cannot yet love within himself. That is why he hides. The psyche does not easily welcome its own unmasking. His addiction is not to her presence, but to the tension she creates, the unbearable pull between wanting and resisting, between control and surrender. He lingers in that tension like a moth around a flame. It gives him life, even as it threatens to consume him. He cannot name this, but he feels it as obsession, fascination, curiosity that never sleeps. The mind tries to rationalize she's different, it's just chemistry, but the soul knows it is alchemy. She dissolves the rigid borders of his ego, not through force, but through being. And he hides because he senses the cost. To love her fully would mean the death of who he thought he was. This is where most men retreat. They ghost, they deflect, they hide behind humor or silence. The feminine within her aches to understand, to reach out, to soothe, but the truth is he must face his fear alone. Every man must descend into his own unconscious to find his strength. Jung called it individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole by confronting one's own shadow. And she, the woman, must resist the temptation to rescue him. Her power lies in stillness, not pursuit. The woman who chases awakens his fear of engulfment. The woman who embodies presence awakens his respect. For when she stays rooted in her own self-worth, she becomes the mirror he cannot shatter. Her calm becomes the silence that exposes his chaos. He may try to provoke her, pull away, then return, testing if her energy still waits. But the evolved feminine does not wait. She witnesses. She knows his hiding is not cruelty, but confusion. He hides because he has never been taught that love can be safe, that vulnerability can be strength. His addiction to her is not about her body or attention, but about the home he feels within her energy, a home he doesn't yet believe he deserves. Sometimes, when he lies awake at night, her image flickers in his mind, not as a fantasy, but as a haunting. He remembers the sound of her voice, the calm in her eyes, the way her silence made him feel seen. He scrolls through her pictures, not for desire, but for reassurance that she was real. His rational mind scolds him, "Move on," but the unconscious whispers, "Learn," because what he really craves is not possession, but peace, the peace that only comes when he embraces his own softness. Until then, he will orbit her, return to her energy in thought and memory, drawn to the mirror of the self he has yet to meet. For the woman, this realization is liberation. She begins to understand that his addiction is not her responsibility to heal. It is his journey to reconcile with his shadow. The more she stands in her light, the more clearly his inner chaos is revealed, not to punish him, but to awaken him. This is the sacred polarity between masculine and feminine. One reflects, the other transforms. And when she finally understands this, she ceases to be reactive. No longer does she decode every silence or chase every answer. She simply is. Her presence becomes the quiet challenge his soul cannot ignore. He will hide, yes, but he will also remember, because the truth of the feminine cannot be unseen once encountered. In the end, it is not about whether he returns or stays, it is about whether she remains true to herself. For the greatest power of the feminine is not in being desired, but in embodying the kind of radiance that awakens truth in others. She becomes less of a dream and more of an initiation, the reminder that love is not possession, but evolution. Time passes, and though his messages fade and his voice retreats into silence, the energy between them lingers, a thread, invisible yet unbreakable. What he hides grows heavier within him. His hidden desires become the language of dreams, the kind that wake him breathless, unsure if what he felt was memory or prophecy. Jung wrote that whatever we repress does not die, it waits. It waits beneath the surface, in the dark soil of the unconscious, until life forces us to face it. He begins to sense this pull as both torment and fascination. When he sees her again, even in passing, even through a picture, something stirs, a flash of longing, an ache in the chest, a fleeting sense of home. He tells himself he's over it, that it was never that deep. But his body disagrees. The body remembers what the mind tries to erase. It's in the tightening of his throat, the tremor in his breath, the restless energy that builds when he thinks of her. This is not merely attraction, it is confrontation. The woman who awakened him has become a mirror for his own evolution. Through her, he must face what he's denied, the tenderness he buried, the vulnerability he mocked, the love he equated with weakness. She represents the end of the false masculine, the crumbling of the idea that control equals power. He hides these desires because he is not yet ready to be undone. He wants the warmth without the exposure, the connection without the surrender. But true desire is not a safe emotion. It demands transformation. When he's near her, the boundaries of who he believes himself to be begin to dissolve. The part of him that strives for logic and distance cannot comprehend this, and so he hides. Yet the hiding itself becomes ritualistic. Every withdrawal, every silence, every rational excuse is a sacred act of resistance, and paradoxically, of intimacy. He is circling her, orbiting her essence, even in absence. The addiction is not to her attention, but to what she symbolizes: truth, beauty, chaos, and mercy woven together in the form of the feminine. She represents what he both fears and longs for: emotional nakedness. And she, the woman, begins to feel this not as loss but as clarity. Her confusion transforms into understanding. She starts to see his distance not as rejection, but as initiation, his own descent into the unconscious, where he must wrestle with his projections. For every man must retrieve his own light from the woman he idealizes. That is how the psyche reclaims balance. The wise woman does not interfere with this process. She does not chase, explain, or try to prove her worth. She knows she was never the cause of his turmoil, only the mirror of it. So she steps back, not in anger but in grace, and lets him meet himself. For it is not her task to heal him. Her role was to awaken him, to touch the sleeping parts of his soul and remind him that he is more than the persona he wears. Her strength lies in restraint, the quiet knowing that she does not need to be chosen to be valuable. She remains magnetic, not because she demands attention, but because she radiates peace. The man who hides his desires will always remember the woman who did not beg for them, for in her stillness he meets his own absence. In her light, he sees the shadows he's run from. This is how the dance continues, not in words or gestures, but in silent transformation. He learns that hiding his desires only delays his healing, while she learns that her worth was never defined by how openly a man adored her. They both become alchemists in their own right, he, by confronting the fire within, she, by embodying serenity amidst uncertainty. And somewhere in the quiet intersection of their souls, a subtle balance begins to form. He no longer fears the depth she carries. She no longer fears the distance he creates. They become reflections of the same truth, that love, when purified of ego and attachment, is not possession but presence. Perhaps one day he will return, not as the man who hides, but as the man who has met himself. Perhaps he won't, but by then she will no longer be waiting. She will have transmuted longing into wisdom, attachment into peace. She will look upon the world not with hunger, but with grace, knowing that every connection, even the unspoken ones, are steps on the path of becoming whole. And as he continues to wrestle with his 7 hidden desires, she continues to rise. For the feminine, when awakened, does not chase what hides. She embodies what calls everything home. He will remember her in the quiet hours, not for what she did, but for what she awakened. She became the mirror that reflected the unspoken ache beneath his armor. Her presence reminded him of what it meant to feel without performing, to want without conquering. That memory will not fade, no matter how many times he tries to rationalize it away, for the soul remembers its initiations. Jung taught that the psyche does not forget its encounters with the archetypal feminine. They mark a man forever, shaping his evolution in ways he cannot yet comprehend. At first, he will seek substitutes, other faces, other voices, other distractions. He will look for her essence in the eyes of different women, mistaking repetition for release. But every new encounter will feel hollow, every conversation slightly out of tune. He won't understand why. It is because the addiction was never to the woman herself, but to the transformation she triggered. Without her, he is deprived of the mirror that made him conscious of his own depths. His denial becomes his cage. The very emotions he hides are the keys to his liberation, yet he clings to the illusion of control. He might dive into work, achievements, or fleeting pleasures, but the silence between them grows louder. The emptiness gnaws at him. It is not loneliness, it is the echo of meaning unfulfilled. The masculine, when disconnected from the inner feminine, loses his poetry, his softness, his soul's color. He becomes efficient but hollow, successful but haunted. She, meanwhile, walks differently now. There's a calmness in her movement, an elegance born of self-awareness. She no longer needs validation to feel desired. The very energy that once longed for his attention has been transmuted into power. She understands that her allure was never about seduction, it was the sacred frequency of truth. She is no longer the reflection of his hunger, but the embodiment of her own wholeness. And yet, she feels compassion, not resentment. She knows that every man who hides his desire is not cruel but uninitiated. He has not yet learned to face the divine mirror without flinching. He has not yet learned that to love is to risk annihilation not of dignity, but of illusion. The masculine must die to his old self, to be reborn capable of true intimacy. Until then, he fears the very thing he craves. This dynamic plays out across time, across lives, the eternal dance between the seeker and the mirror, the pursuer and the muse, the ego and the soul. The woman who embodies the awakened feminine becomes both blessing and trial. She does not need to speak to teach. Her presence alone challenges every falsehood he clings to. And though he hides, she feels his energy hovering, unable to detach. His silence is not absence, it is resistance. His avoidance is not rejection, it is worship in disguise. But she no longer measures connection by proximity. She has tasted something deeper, the quiet ecstasy of knowing herself. Jung wrote that the feminine, when integrated, becomes the vessel through which spirit meets matter. She now understands that love is not the merging of two incomplete beings, but the recognition between two who have faced their shadows and survived. One night, perhaps years later, he will see her again in a crowd, in a dream, in a photograph that time forgot. Her eyes will no longer seek him, they will simply be, and that stillness will pierce him more than any plea could have. He will understand, at last, what he once feared, that she was never his to possess. She was the lesson he had to learn. And maybe, in that moment, he will feel gratitude not for the desire she stirred, but for the parts of himself she forced him to confront, because through her, he met his shadow. Through her, he glimpsed his soul. That is the secret addiction, not to her form, but to the awakening she inspired. And she, sensing his distant recognition, will smile softly, not out of pride, but peace. She knows now that the men who hide their desires are not lost, they are simply on their way home to themselves. Her journey is no longer to wait for them, but to walk ahead, illuminating the path with her own light. For in the end, it is not he who is addicted to her, it is the universe itself, addicted to the beauty of awakening through human hearts. Every man and woman is merely an instrument in that symphony of consciousness, playing out the eternal melody of desire, loss, and transcendence. And as the music fades, she stands unshaken, no longer chasing what hides, no longer seeking what withdraws. She is whole, radiant in her solitude, magnetic in her calm. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.